Hello, welcome to this special episode of Rich Insights. I'm Don Rich, the Chief of Investments for Esoterica Capital Management. Now, the reason for this special edition is that we have just seen a tremendous amount of activity in recent days that we need to pick through. And the reason for this is because the markets are nervous, right? How nervous are they? Well, to borrow one of my father's favorite expressions, the markets are about as nervous as an old boy with diarrhea that feels a sneeze coming on. All right, now that's nervous. And we are seeing that in the actions today. Woo-wee, are we seeing some actions today and on Friday. All right, I'm going to hit that. The big one on Friday, of course, was the fiscal action. It was the government. And I'll walk through the details of that in a follow-up video. But the main action was the president declared a national state of emergency due to the coronavirus. Well, so what? Well, that frees up about $40 to $50 billion that he can spend immediately. He can spend it very quickly, without the approval, largely without the approval of Congress. He can essentially spend it however he wants. Hopefully it's effective, but it does free up some immediate money very quickly. All right, so that was one thing on Friday. Now, today, Sunday afternoon, we saw the Fed make an emergency rate cut. All right, it is unusual for the Fed to have emergency meetings. Right, we've seen two now in the last 2 weeks. Remember, 2 weeks ago, the Fed had an emergency rate move up, and they cut rates 50 basis points, or 0.5%. And today, what they do today? Well, there's three prongs to what they did today. They lowered interest rates 100 basis points. All right, so that takes us down to effectively zero. All right, the Fed funds rate of interest is effectively zero. Now, I told you last week this was coming. You remember. Go back and look at the videos. Told you this was coming, and here it is. It's called ZIRP, Zero Interest Rate Policy. We're here. All right, so that's the first thing, zero interest rates. The second thing they did is they lowered the rate at which banks can borrow directly from the Fed. All right, this is not the Fed funds rate. This is the rate at which banks can borrow directly from the Fed. It's something called the discount window. Now, historically, the problem with the discount window is it has a stigma, right? Nobody wants to go to the discount window because it sort of has a smell of death, right? If you go there, you're in trouble. That's what the market's perceiving. If you go to the discount window, the perception is you are in trouble, right? Banks would much rather find funding in the marketplace, not to have to go to the Fed and ask for it. But again, the second thing they did today was lower that discount rate to 25 basis points, 0.25%, or effectively zero. Now, but you know what I told you, it still has a smell of fear, smell of death to it. So what you're probably going to see tomorrow is they're going to try to remove the stigma from this discount window. All right, how do they remove the stigma? Well, I imagine this is already all taking place behind the scenes. It's all been coordinated. The way to remove this stigma is you're going to see all the big banks, right? All the marquee names go to the discount window and all borrow at the same time. Probably the same amounts even. All right, I'm talking about Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, right? The whole list. They're all going to go there once, most likely in an orchestrated manner. Of course, they'll never say that to the world. But the idea is to get them to all go there and to remove the stigma. And again, if banks can borrow from discount window for zero, then the idea is hopefully that they'll start loaning out more to those that need it in response to the corona difficulties. Now, why is this important? All right, why is this important? Because the Fed doesn't have authorization to enact direct lending programs like they did in 2008. Think of the programs like the TARP and other programs. The targeted lending programs has to be approved by Congress. And they were given authority in 2008. Surprisingly, they weren't even given authority initially. It was the second or third time they went to Congress before it was approved. But they don't have that authority today. So they're hoping the banks start doing this in lieu of them. All right. That's what I said, the kitchen sink. They are all in. They used all their tools that they have available. They used them today. All right. So the first thing was they lowered rates 100 basis points. The discount window, right, effectively took that interest rate to zero as well, trying to get the banks. And again, you're going to see a follow-up to that to try to remove the stigma of that. Now, the third thing they did is they also announced a quantitative easing program, right? $700 billion. Not a too small of amount, right? You say that should do some good. Maybe that'll help. Well, the big advantage to quantitative easing is the Fed can buy long-term interest rates, which pushes down the rate on those long-term bonds. Pushes down long-term interest rates, right? Makes their mortgage rates cheaper, makes long-term borrowing cheaper. But long-term interest rates are already really low, right? They've fallen off a cliff. They're below 1%. So the quantitative easing aspect of this, as far as lowering long-term interest rates, is not going to have much effect. But remember, again, we talked about this in the last week's video, the quantitative easing program can buy anything that's government insured, right? They're handcuffed to that government guarantee. So that means that they can buy treasury bonds and they can buy mortgage-backed securities that are insured by the government. So even though the quantitative easing expansion shouldn't have much effect on interest rates, it will also allow them to buy mortgage-backed securities, right? Some 200 or 250 of the $700 billion is going to be spent on mortgages, right? And there's some dislocations going on in the mortgage market. The secondary market of mortgages is gummed up a bit right now. So that should free that up. All right, so what's all this mean? All right. Oh, and before I get to what all this means, let's address the question, why Sunday afternoon? This smells of fear, right? This does not look good. Well, remember last Thursday, in the Thursday video, we told you to expect a relief rally, right? And the reasons were twofold. One, we were terribly oversold. And second, there was all kinds of rumblings that this major fiscal stimulus plan was coming. President Trump was dropping hints. Speaker Pelosi was discussing it and so forth. So the market was giddy about what they thought a big stimulus plan was coming. Well, if you stayed around and watched the news announcements Friday afternoon, you know they didn't materialize. The stimulus plan, and in a follow-up video, I'm going to go through the components of the stimulus plan, but they really don't have any meaningful effect. At least I don't expect they're going to have a meaningful effect. So why did the Fed move Sunday afternoon? Because the run-up on Friday was at least due in part due to the anticipation of this great package we were supposed to get Friday afternoon, Friday evening. It didn't show up. All right, so the president and the Fed and everyone was probably concerned that we were looking at some markets that were going to be seriously down tomorrow. Right? And they wanted to get out in front of that. All right, so that's the reason, my guess, again, purely my guess, as to why they did this on Sunday afternoon. But it does smell of desperation. Okay, now what does all this mean going forward? Well, unfortunately, it's in the near term, it's not likely to have any effect, right? What good are these lower interest rates? Hell, they could give me airline tickets. I'm not going to fly. The restaurants can call me and tell me, if you get your fat butt in here, I'll give you free food. I'm not going into the restaurants. I'm not going to movie theaters. I'm not going to country music concerts. Right? And there's a lot of people that feel like me, have my beliefs as far as that's concerned. All right. So none of the packages that were announced by the president or by the Fed today target the problem areas. They're not going to help our airline industry, the restaurant industry, right? the movies. We got all the schools closed. We got the world is coming to a halt here for 8 to 10 weeks. It looks like. So I don't think it's going to have any meaningful effect. All right, but there's a silver lining here. What they're trying to do is twofold. They're trying to keep the health crisis from evolving into a financial crisis. All right? The health crisis is definitely going to have an economic implication. Now, we all hope that we go down the path that we're seeing in China, right? Things appear to be getting better in China. So that means 8 to 10 weeks of this isolated environment, schools closed, restaurants closed, right? Everything's closed. 8 to 10 weeks of this, we'll get in front of the virus, right? That's what it looks like is happening in China. Now, Europe's just at the peak of the pain right now in their 8 to 10 week process. They're at the peak of the pain. Now, we haven't even started. We haven't even started the pain yet. So our 8 to 10 week process hasn't even started. But there's no doubt that the health crisis is going to have an economic impact because, again, we're talking 2 to 3 months of largely no economic activity. All right, so the idea of today's actions is to break the health crisis from evolving into a financial crisis. And my guess is it may have done that, or at least started to do that. The second reason for today's actions is that the Fed used all the ammo they have. All right, they went all in. So if the Fed wants to do further actions, they're going to have to get congressional approval. And it's most likely going to be easier for them to get that approval once they've already exhausted all the bullets they have. All right. So that's my guess for justifying what we've seen this afternoon. Now, will it have any effect on markets? Again, my guess is where the volatility is going to continue. The volatility is going to continue because the spending programs, the stimulus programs that we've seen so far, really are not targeting the problem areas that I can tell, as near as I can tell. They may have some benefits further down the road, but the immediate problems remain unchanged. So that's my take on things. All right. So you just experienced a rich insight. All right. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.